thanks to everyone for being here, and thanks for our audience. I'm not sure, is it Harper or at Alameda? Whichever one. We have both rooms are on the screen, so thanks for being here. Welcome to the Junior Faculty Lecture Series, and Dr. Gordon reminds me I don't want to forget to invite everyone to a mixer, which will follow immediately in Faculty Lounge on the first floor. With some food and drink, so please join us for that. I want to remind everybody also here on the first slide that these lectures and the prior lectures are all taped and available online. So please refer to some of the past ones as well as this one, which will be up in short order. I'd like to introduce the panel first of all, and I'll tell you how we came to this topic. They are in order. Alphabetical order. Dr. Linda Baum, Professor of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine. Ines Bochat, who's Professor of Radiology and Pediatrics, I think will be joining us. Dr. David Liebskin, Professor of Neurology. Dr. John Lowe, Professor of Psychiatry. And then Lynn Gordon and I are both representing the Dean's Office. Lynn is the Associate Dean for Diversity Affairs. We came up with the idea of doing a topic that we called the top 10 mistakes in talking to your boss. And that just sounded so negative that I turned it around a little bit to make it a little more positive. But please, let's make this interactive. The slides are just sort of to give us some guidance. I've drawn on the wisdom of the group in making some of the slides. But please, let's make it an interactive discussion and ask us some questions as we go on, because we have a lot of expertise. You want to go to the front?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Sure.
Are we moving to the front?
I think everybody. I have to stay here. Okay.
Oh, we have more people.
Where do you sit when talking to your boss? Maybe we'll that's front choreography of it. We'll come up. We'll talk about it. Just to start with a definition, I went to the Oxford English Dictionary online. Boss is a person who is in charge of a worker or organization, a person in control of a group or situation. In computer gaming, I like this one, a particularly tough enemy, usually appearing at the end of a section or level for maybe young people who are better at computer games than I am. And I think we're probably talking about our chair. Is that correct, panel, for the purposes of today's discussion? We're talking about meeting with and negotiating with the chair of our department. If anyone else has some other adversary that you'd like to ask about, or if you think it changes the dynamic at all, please ask us as we go along. So I think there's probably two basic scenarios: either your chair invites you to a meeting, or you request a meeting with your chair. Anyone have any comments on that? Are they different? Is the dynamic different?
Well, when you request a meeting with your chair, you sort of know why you want to meet with your chair. And when your chair requests a meeting with you, that's something that you
It's
need
a different
to find.
ballgame.
Right, you say, well, sure, I'm going to come right up to your office, but you need to know a little bit more. So I'm going to let other people talk. But before I give up the mic, so you said your adversary. So it reminds me of fish are friends, not food, from, what was that? What? Finding Nemo.
Oh,
So
right.
your boss, your chair is not necessarily your adversary.
No, that
He's
was a
probably
poor
your
choice.
support. You're your great supporter.
And the tape back.
Okay, we'll rewind.
Well, that's good. Lynn's right. You have to reframe the experience.
Anyway.
It was such a psychiatrist comment.
Well, maybe we'll talk about some of the differences in these two scenarios as we go forward and talk about.
But I would say that just because your chair wants to see you doesn't mean it's bad.
So if it isn't stated by someone what the purpose of the meeting is, should you ask? Do you have the right to ask?
Absolutely.
Is it okay?
It's critical to ask.
Okay.
Yes.
For reasons that we'll come to on some of the subsequent slides. I thought that maybe just thinking about timing of the meeting, style and substance would be some areas that would help us to organize our thinking. So maybe some do's and don'ts of timing, and these are some things that I thought of. So do schedule it. So if you want to meet with your chair, obviously if your chair calls you, it's going to be scheduled. But if if you want to meet with your chair, you should schedule it. And my thoughts, and maybe the panel would have some comments on this, but I think in general, one of the pitfalls that I've seen is catching your chair when he or she is tired and hungry at the end, as we all are at the end of the day. And, kind of grabbing it, can I grab you for a quick second? Catching someone in the hall kind of on the run, or coming and running over when you get some piece of information that's really of acute importance to you. Does the panel have comments about that?
I mean, I think it should be, the purpose of the meeting in either direction is that it should be efficient use of time, and it should be productive on both ends. And often this boils down to having a very focused, topic of discussion, not 10 different things. Maybe even a couple things, but even if it's a 5-minute meeting, at least it's an opener to, hey, we need to sit down and address this, and there could be a subsequent time. But given the number of different meetings that occur, around the campus, just having a schedule, I think, is important.
And I'd say, what John said, if you're acutely concerned about something, that doesn't mean it's acute. So it's helpful to just take a deep breath and step back and say, okay, I think I'm going to chew on this for a day, and then I'll contact my chair tomorrow. So I think that's helpful, and just another suggestion. I find people say a lot of things in email, and if you want to speak with your chair, it would be good to not like bleh in the email, but just say, I'm concerned about a thing we have. It could be scheduling a sign out, it could be funding, whatever. I'm concerned about this. May I make an appointment to meet with you? But don't necessarily, I think that it's appropriate to let the chair know what you're concerned about, but I would not necessarily dump everything in your email.
I would echo that in spades. I think what Linda just said is so critical. We often, we get concerned about something. We tend to write emails. When I dictate, I just discovered that I dictated in an email that I sent off. And spell check did not do me any favors, because the word that it changed to was something really bizarre. And, we hear about the funny things that go on when spell check changes something when you dictate into your iPhone. But it's not very funny depending upon who you send that to. So if you have, emails should be for scheduling meetings or confirming things, not for having a conversation or a discussion.
Right.
It's kind of a dangerous medium, I'm sorry, it's kind of a dangerous medium, and it can be funny. I looked at something I wrote late last night, but I saved it in draft, and then because I wanted to confirm that I was really going to send it today, and I wrote Meistein of faculty. Mice are nice is probably okay, but it really is vice, so you have to be careful and reread. I'm sorry, Dr. Lowe.
No, I was just going to add that I agree with those comments. As you know, emails don't carry the verbal feedback, the tone, the body language of the recipient, and especially if something is acute to you and you decide to hastily compose something, it's usually emotionally charged, and chances are you're going to regret it later. That's not quite what you wanted to say, but in the heat of the moment, you sort of fire off something. So it's better to, in that situation, cool off and then revisit the email if you still want to send it, or as was mentioned earlier, just keep it simple. I'd like to meet with you about this topic and keep it succinct.
The other comment to make that sort of addresses a number of these points is that, for things to be remembered and for there to be, for instance, an action item or something that's going to happen going on, this is the comment that I made earlier about being productive, it has to sort of get filed mentally somewhere. And I think a lot of people work in this fashion, and a lot of chairs may work for them. Here's a meeting, there's a follow-up item. It sort of gets organized in that fashion. In the midst of the hallway, it gets lost, so it doesn't really register anywhere. So it's a lot better to have it set aside, even literally for a few minutes at a set time.
What I do recommend, though, is after that meeting, that's when you go to email, because you want to make sure that A, there's documentation of what was said, and B, that you understood what they said to you. So after that meeting, write them a quick email saying, thank you so much for meeting with me, just to make sure I understood correctly. This is the issue that we discussed, and this is the action plan. And you can ask for them to confirm it, they may or may not confirm it, but regardless, it's a trail so that you know that you have communicated what you understood.
That's a great point, and I forgot that one, so we may come back to that at the end in terms of what the follow-up ought to be. Just to say, emails are absolutely charged with emotion and attitude, and so we have to be careful. Questions or comments about this from the audience? I'm going to rely on everybody to raise his or her hand as we go on.
I know people are busy, and it feels like you have this long list of things you have to do. And the older I get, the longer I do things here, the more I value not getting stuff done by email, unless it's truly just communicate. Someone said, no, just information transfer. It's information transfer, fine. But the value in saying, even if it isn't so much as a meeting, it could be something with a phone call. Could I make an appointment for a 2-minute phone call? I just want to chat with you. I can't stress how helpful that is, because then you're on the same page with someone. You don't get into one of those weird email trail things. Did you mean this? No, I meant this. Yeah. So I would just suggest you think about it.
I usually schedule every phone call. I just say, is it okay if I give you a quick call? Because first of all, it's very hard to get people on the phone nowadays. It tends to go to voicemail, but also it gives them the opportunity to decide, do I really want to talk to him? Or do I want to talk to him on my own terms? And rather than picking up the phone and then being right in the middle of something. So that's something to consider. I think people appreciate it. That's a good use of email, I think. I think this next one, Dr. Malin, I think this comes from you directly. We're going to talk about the style of communication or interaction, and then we're going to talk about substance. So over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, different ones of us submitted this, some with humorous anecdotes. But this has come up before. If you want to communicate with someone effectively and you want to get something out of the process, and that person, there's a power disequilibrium, so they have something and you would like it, I would suggest you consider making sure you communicate in a way that they find effective. So for instance, Dean Gordon was just saying, so you follow up with the email, dear so-and-so, thank you for meeting with me. If your chair or division chief or whatever tends to say, dear so-and-so, I'd like to get together, and they actually say something in a more formal way, don't text, don't use email as text and go back, K. Not good, really not good, okay.
LOL.
Yeah, LOL. If your chair is not a demonstrative huggy person, don't reach out about the chair. Okay, these are all personal experiences. So just really be it true. I've had people say, but I prefer to do things this way. It's like, well, again, it's not about you. It's about the situation. You would like it to be a positive, effective situation. So pay attention to that. I think a lot of us don't necessarily pay attention to how best to get someone to hear us.
That's an excellent point. I think that, one thing that we forget about is the fact that, that there are different styles. There's not a set style that a chair has. Any one institution, the style will vary across the departments, and the chairs change within the department. All of a sudden, very radically different style may come on scene. So it's very individualized.
And this all takes work. All this stuff we're talking about takes work.
We're going to have one of these just on email, I think.
Right.
Meeting us about that.
I would guess that if you don't know the chair well enough to determine what style to use, then it may behoove you to ask a colleague who you see as successful to say, hey, how's the best way to approach the chair or the division chief about this particular idea?
And in addition to the style, understanding both your personality structure and a little bit of guessing about their personality structure, because different personalities like to do things in different ways as well. And so you want to try to understand a little bit more about that so that you can be more effective, not just communicating with your chair, but communicating in any situation where you're asking for something or you're trying to find a common ground. If you don't understand the type of style that somebody has, it will be less effective. That was a psychiatry sort of thing.
That's right, very good.
Some more points that the panel proposed, and then one that I put at the end, should you take notes, but be in control, talk eye to eye, quote, I knew I was right, and I wanted my boss to recognize how right I was. I think that's from Dr. Warren.
That is for me.
Comments about from the panel?
Yeah, I want to hear the story.
Well, I made that as a mistake early on in the VA with my boss who was new, and it doesn't work out. It just doesn't work out. It's really a disaster. And the real issue is, especially when there are power differentials, you have to recognize that there are, who has the power, right? Because sometimes you have the power, sometimes somebody else has the power, but you have to recognize in any relationship who holds the power. And sometimes it's somebody who's subordinate to you or somebody who reports to you, but in that particular circumstance, they have the power because they control something that you want to change. So, you know, you might be right about something, but you don't want to, you want them to, perhaps, you want to nuance the discussion. You don't want to hammer in that you made the right call or you made the right decision, because that's just bragging or trying to undermine somebody else, and you never want to do that. Just never. And as I said, I did this really early in my career, and it was painful.
You're still
These are true confessions.
What do you do?
It's like a group therapy session.
What do you do when you're nervous? How do you control that? What can you do to help? I don't think, by the way, it's necessarily bad to just admit that you're nervous or scared. We've all done that in meetings where we are. But is there anything you can do there to calm yourself? Don't without taking beta blockers or something.
I was going to suggest that.
What can you do to calm yourself? What can you do to calm yourself down?
So, Dr. Gordon and I were at one of these junior faculty lunch things, and several of the junior faculty were saying that they really freeze up when they're talking to the chair. It's very difficult. And I said, well, you know, if you're really having a hard time, just imagine them in some vulnerable position. Imagine them with their hands down. But do you remember this? Dr. Gordon's husband is my chair. John, that way? So don't do that, okay? Don't do that. But think, you know, you have to take the person, you know, you can imagine the barefoot, down a notch. You know, if you're really nervous, you just have to realize that you have to somehow,
Humanize them.
yeah, that's a good word, yeah.
Humanize.
Difficult as that may be.
Remember, they've probably been at some point when they were junior in a similar situation, so they've been through this before.
It sounds a little bit like I'm getting into the psych aspects of this too. But, you know, whoever your boss is or the chair, they have a certain style because they're comfortable with it and they identify with it. And that goes very much towards why they want you to reciprocate in, you know, the same style. So you do have to match the styles. I think one of the additional aspects is sort of the other extreme. You have to be careful not to, you know, if you're very nervous, to spout off about 10 different tangential topics, because it will be very confusing. The person on the receiving end will not prioritize what is most important to you. And they will really want to boil it down, he or she down to, you know, what is this, the one item that I have to, you know, that we have to address and follow. You know, so it really devalues that meeting because you've thrown out 10 different topics that you want to discuss. It's better to almost, you know, encapsulate, you know, the one or two juicy things that you want to discuss, keep it, and even if there are other things, pause, you know, and don't pause for too long.
We're gonna come back to that thought too, when we talk about preparation. What about taking notes of the meeting? And one of the things that I try to do when someone comes into the office and I invite them to sit down is to bring over a pad of paper just to kind of say that this is important and I want to take down notes and make sure that I get it right so that I don't forget anything you've told me, and it can help me when I try to act on whatever I've been asked. What about when you go to meet your chair? Should you? What about that? Does it matter if you feel comfortable taking notes? Is it okay to do that?
like to do it because that help. I am a visual learner more than an auditory learner, and I'm worried that if I just try to remember what somebody told me, I won't remember it. And I'm lucky because my chair takes notes. He gets these handwritten notes, and every time I meet with him, he brings out my file, and he's got like handwritten notes from 10, 15 years ago. He says, remember when we talked about this? And I like him looking over his notes to try to remember. I think it's fine, but I think, again, it's a style issue. Your chair might be concerned for some reason if you're taking notes.
Right, wouldn't take copious notes.
Right. So you might say, do you mind if I take some notes? It'll help me remember what we discussed.
I'll tell you, the converse is worse though, because people have said, may I come see you? And they come see me. And we talk about something. And then they go, do you have a piece of paper and a pencil I can have? You don't look prepared. And you're asking someone for something typically. So I would come, err on the side of a little more preparation. And if the chair says, yeah, I would prefer if we just talk and then we can write it down after, that's fine. But at least you be prepared.
I think nowadays the additional challenge is that, we take notes, we use electronic media a lot. And one of the downsides is that people think that you're not paying attention, on a phone, nobody knows what your, etiquette is. You're not supposed to look over and, say, what exactly are you writing down? So it is a little bit disconcerting if someone's on a device, which is a challenge because I think that, it's so common nowadays. I almost never take written notes anymore, but I would in this particular situation intentionally, just specifically jot down a few things. And avoid the devices.
Don't photograph the box.
Right. Right, and I would not go in and say, you don't mind if we record this.
Don't do that.
Typically, you really don't want to do that. The next meeting is going to be with someone's attorney if you do that.
The next one will be with you. I want to echo what you said because I've started taking notes on my iPhone. Like I'll be in a lecture and I'm taking notes on the iPhone. And people like looking at me like, aren't you paying attention? And so if you're in a small group setting and you're taking notes on a device, just let them know what you're doing. I wanted to take some notes, I'm going to do it on my iPad or my iPhone. Do you mind? So if you raise that issue, then that's perfect.
I'm sorry. I have a whole bunch of other faculty waiting for the faculty to show up in the faculty lounge. So I said, let me go check and see where everybody else is.
There's people down there?
Yeah, so,
That's at 5 o'clock.
no, I was there with them discussing what to do with the chair.
Oh, good.
And waiting, when
Well,
is
thank you.
everybody
Well,
going
another
to show
lecture
up? We totally misunderstood it. So,
Are the others coming?
yeah.
Oh,
So
good.
Isadora went to get them.
Oh,
There's an error in communication.
Okay.
That's it.
5 o'clock in the faculty lounge for food and beverage and conversation.
There's Dr. Beauchamp, as I introduced it as promised. I apologize.
Yes, good.
All right. So I think we've already begun to allude to the idea of preparation. We talked about this a little bit. I accepted the meeting but didn't know the topic. I think we've covered that. So here's some notes that I received from the group. Be prepared for the meeting. If the chair requested it, find out the reason and prepare your arguments of what you're going to say, I guess. If it was you who asked for the meeting, prepare even better. As Dr. Gordon said before, your recital or big game you practiced. Why did you think that you could go into an important meeting with your boss without preparation? So maybe the group could make some comments about how to prepare if you're given the topic by your chair.
I think you at least want to think about it. You want to at least mull it over. So there's some basic level of preparation. You definitely don't want to come in and say, I don't know, I haven't thought about it at all. Or you have to have some thought that goes into it. And if it's a potentially not necessarily a negative scenario, but it's a difficult scenario, situation, or if there's a conflict, I think it's very important to remember that there's always not just two sides, but several different perspectives on the same scenario, and that from their position, they're going to see it definitely to some degree from that. They don't want to hear your side, but they want to make sure that they understand, that you understand that there are other perspectives, so to resolve how, X scenario occurred.
I think I would add, from my own experience, when the chair asked me to have a meeting, asked what the topic was, and it was about that I was being recruited by another university. And so he wanted to meet immediately that afternoon, and I basically said, oh no, I'm busy, because I knew I needed time to figure out what my thoughts and responses were. So I asked to wait over the weekend and had the meeting. So I think, even though I didn't know exactly which way it was going to go, having a little bit of time to prepare my own thoughts and feelings about what, so I knew what the topic was, I didn't know which way it was going to happen, and being a new experience, I didn't know how the scenario was going to play out, so I felt like I needed at least some preparedness about, okay, if he asks this, here's my counter, or what. So, you do want that time, and I think it's your right to ask for a little bit of time. Obviously, you wouldn't put it off 2 weeks, but, and ultimately it worked out to my advantage, but it was very kind of intimidating to think that the chair wants to speak to you when you've never spoken to him, because I usually negotiate with the division chief, so I knew this was a big deal.
It's an excellent point. And even then during the meeting, same thing that comes up. So if, your chair then said, well, all right, well, I'll offer you this, what do you think? Will you take it? You're going to need time to think about it. So don't ever go the next step unless you're sure.
And I think the very important is to have data to support. Anyone's here,
So sorry. The first half, I'll show you where you can get it online. Very sorry that we, welcome to our conference.
So I think that having data is very important to support things that you're asking or to argue in favor of your argument. So you just not come unprepared in the sense that you have no information about what you're asking. If it's something related to productivity, have the data in your department about clinical productivity or research productivity. If you're going to be discussing salaries, know what is the average salary. There are books produced with data about salaries in different universities in different parts of the country. So you go already with a certain baseline of information that is going to be giving or be able to argue in your favor.
Yeah, those numbers are extremely valuable. It's not just because you're going to pose this argument to your chair, but a lot of the times that argument has to be, that your chair has to then go on, or he or she has to then persuade others about that. And, they, are your advocate in that regard. So you're arming them with the data.
I would say, even if it isn't something that's numeric, if the chair tells you the topic, you ask the topic, pitch it to me, parse your idea. So one way to think about something is, saying it's just to think about it, and I'm thinking, but it hasn't now gotten broken down any more granular. Parse the topic for a variety of reasons. Number one, it allows you to kind of have an entry point. If it's a great big thing, you can start off with this part of it. Another aspect of it is, if there's multiple aspects involved, maybe you would get a win or a workout for you on this, and this, so you're willing to give up this. If you come in kind of, I have my idea, and either it's a win or lose situation, that's just challenging. So the more you can kind of parse whatever you're concerned about or whatever the chair is asking about into component pieces, the more effective more effective conversation you'll be able to have.
What about using a colleague or a family member as a sounding board in preparation? Is that good, bad, indifferent?
I think it's great, and that's sort of the issue of practice and preparation. So if you know that you're going to have, so your conversation could be difficult or challenging, or could just be terrific and happy, or somewhere in between. Especially if you think that whatever conversation you're going to have is difficult and challenging, you've got to have your points very clearly articulated and supporting material with equal clarity. And trying it out on a family member is perfect, because often the family member isn't intimately aware of the nuances of what's going on in your department. So they can listen to it, or maybe they are because you've been talking about it for years. But if you go through and try to outline what your key points are, how you're going to make it, what language you're going to use, other people can be a reflection to you to help you determine whether the choice of language or the choice of scenarios or the choice of argument is likely going to be met favorably, even if it's a disagreement, or unfavorably. So you don't want to come off hostile, you don't want to come across argumentative, you don't want to come across with, I'm right and I want you to know it. And so it's helpful to have a sounding board, and whether that's a colleague in your department or a friend or family member.
I'd actually say that I would enhance that and say colleagues actually at a different university might be useful, because they will, as Dr. Gordon was mentioning, will not know the culture there, may present ideas that you may not have thought of. So definitely this is where making a pitch for reviewing some of the slides, networking at meetings, so you meet colleagues at other universities in similar positions that you have might be very helpful.
And an excellent, aspect of that is that what you're doing that for is really you're getting a little bit more of an objective partner in that process. And what that objective partner will hopefully tell you is that, hey, that sounds really negative what you're, the way you're going. Which gets to this other issue that comes up again and again, is that people like positive. People don't like, here's a big problem. And probably worse than here's a big problem is that, and there's no solution to it, right? That's just, it's a no-go. People want to hear, positive, and if there is a real issue, then okay, well, there are some solutions in terms of how do we work our way out through this.
I would say, even if you don't have someone you could talk to, just say it out loud, because sometimes you're thinking in your head, you say it like, oh, that's going to not go well if I use that word. So just really be a little self-critical.
Or even write it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can certainly practice it out loud, but if you write it down, put it in a drawer, look at it next day, you will see it freshly with new eyes, and may find areas that probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And what I was mentioning with the group when we were downstairs, make a list of the things that you want to discuss, so that you don't get so involved in one piece of the argument that you forget the rest, and when you walk out of the room you go, oh, I forgot to say such a
I
thing.
should have said.
Yeah. And it wouldn't occur to you to go give a lecture without preparing it. And when it's an important conversation, it's important to prepare it as well. And not only on the way, what is it that you're going to be talking about, but the way you present it, your body language, the way you walk into the room, the way you sit down, the eye-to-eye contact, even the way you're dressed is important when you go to a meeting like this. There are days that I know I have to look professorial today.
So again, we've begun to allude to some of these areas. What can happen if you don't come in with a plan? How could a situation degenerate? Tell an anecdote.
So Diego was saying, it's good, number one, to walk in like, this is a problem, it's insoluble. Yeah. Which is basically saying to the chair, you fix it for me.
What are you going to do
Yeah,
about this one?
exactly. So I would say, we have a challenge. I think we could do A, B, or C, and I favor A, but B has its merits, and you could do C, but I think it has its downfall. Because the problem is that if you don't come in with A, B, and C, your chair could come up with D, which you don't like. But the chair just came up with it, so that's what you're doing. So if you wanted to go in your favor, come in with solutions, potential solutions. I learned that hard way. That was me, yeah.
At the chair that we know.
No, prior chair. Okay.
Other comments on that panel, how it can degenerate or go off the rails if you come in without a plan? How about a little bit about negotiating? Was this Dr. Brown also?
Right.
Okay, there you go, that's all right.
Yeah, so there are books on how to negotiate, and they're really valuable, and they're written for not lawyers. They're written for an educated lay press. One's called Getting to Yes. This is the name of the book. Write this down. Getting to Yes, ask for it. If you think this is something that's a challenge for you, reading these tips can be helpful. And if you're going in to negotiate something, come in knowing kind of probably 2x of whatever you want is a little arrogant, but 0.9x of what you want is silly, because that's what you're going to get. So
Or less.
Or less, you're right. Because if you come in and say, well, if you come in and say, and I like this, and the chair goes, yeah, sure, you're like, didn't ask for it. But you really want to develop some of these negotiating skills and have a sense of what's possible, And you also want it to look like you'll be able to give a little. If you come in and you ask a little high in the chair, and it doesn't have to be just money, it could be space, it could be resources, it could be another fellow, it could be, I don't know, whatever is important to you. If you come in and say here, and the chair goes, well, we'd like to do that, but we're gonna do this, you go, well, could we do this? Yeah. And then you look reasonable. Okay? But if you come in at your bottom line, you didn't leave yourself any place to look reasonable if this isn't gonna work out. You're not, people think, oh, I don't wanna ask for too much. If you come in at your bottom line, it's really not good for either person.
I think there's also, sorry,
No, go ahead.
there's also a philosophy in terms of, why are you asking for certain things? It's very rare that I think it's just one number. It's all in the details, and, the terms of the deal. In terms of, and that's where the why is very important. You're not gonna ask for, X amount of salary for 1 year, and then not think about what happens after that 1 year. Right? Where is that going from? What are the sources? That gets to this issue of solutions. Where is it supposed to come from? Right? So I think that they want you to understand that, there's, different sources, there's different ways to generate money. They want to know, what are you interested in doing? Where would you like to focus? And I think that, the thing that comes up a lot at different training levels and through the faculty years is everybody always asks this one question, which is, how do you describe your time? How much teaching, clinical research service, how do you break it up in administration, And there is something to be said about that. It's not just those bare numbers. It's, how do you juggle that? And what are you most interested in? And it's not just one number, So I think actually that one number of salary is very short-sighted in terms of what else is in terms of the next.
So one interesting thing in one of the books that I've read on this type of topic, they talked about two people that came in for a job interview and they were asked to propose a starting salary. And one person proposed a higher starting salary than the other one. Well, it turns out that the person who was doing the interviewing actually valued that person more because they felt that they were more confident about what their abilities were. So it wasn't that they chose the person who asked for a lower starting salary. They actually chose the person who asked for more because they felt that that person had a vision and a confidence that merited the decision-making of the person doing the interviewing. So don't undervalue yourself. You're not doing yourself any favors career-wise or in any other way. And echoing what was just said, don't draw lines in the sand. You have to have blurred margins. And you have to be able to be flexible. Give a little on one side, take a little on the other side, but come up to something that you feel comfortable with.
That's a good lead-in to something I think that you sent in, Dr. Gordon.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
I wanted to win so badly that I forgot to win with.
Yeah. Well, I've seen this, and I don't want to hog the podium at this point, but I've seen people who do this, and they wind up shooting themselves in the foot because they wind up not getting anything. Or worse, they wind up needing to go and look for a job elsewhere because, they're not willing to bend. And so it's those lines in the sand, no matter who you are or what you're doing, don't ever back yourself into a corner that you can't get out of.
Well, there are some circumstances, and that's a question that I asked for the group. You are promised something and not given it. And that's really part of what you were there for, was part of a grant, a certain space you were promised to. And so you go and talk to the chair, I didn't get the grant, the space, the grant is there, funded. Where is this? And you keep getting this postponing. How do you deal with that?
Well, okay, so life's not fair, and it's not a democracy here. It's really not a democracy. I said that several times this last week. But the challenge is, even if it's not something that was promised and you're really getting the short end of the stick, but I've had people come in, or I've been in situations where someone has come in with, but I want this, and you have to think before you go in, are you willing to walk away? Because if what you're setting up is I want this, now you may want to walk away. You may say, you know what, it was really interesting being chair of this course, but I don't have the resources anymore, so thank you so much. It's been a very interesting experience, but if we can't get the resources, I'll just decline being chair next year. So it's not like you're quitting your job. We all do many, many things, and we have to be thoughtful about that. So if you're gonna walk into a negotiation, have something to negotiate with. If you're looking at this and going, I have nothing to negotiate with, then it's not a negotiation, then it's a request. But some people have walked in and said, well, I want to negotiate this. I'm like, what do you have to give? But sometimes you do, but you have to be, sometimes you also have to decide, okay, then, you know what? This isn't working anymore. When the group wants to renew the grant, I'm going to say no thank you next time because the aggravation wasn't worth it, or I couldn't get the resources, or it took me so long to negotiate, my other things got neglected and I didn't get the paper out. I think it's really critical to evaluate everything we do on a regular basis and go, what am I willing to use as a bargaining chip? If I have to pick one thing over the other, what am I willing to give up?
Is there a point where you might say, you've presented some possibilities that I really need to digest and to ask to stop and continue the discussion? Is that a reasonable strategy?
I think it gets to a point in which you have to, because it may create a situation of such antagonism or no solution coming out in that environment. So might as well take a break and come back and talk some more after you have had some thoughts about the issue. It's painful, but maybe a
I think that you should think about it from a global sense. You have people politically who, really don't like dealing with each other. Bad things happen in the world of global politics. And people have to sit down and face each other. They do exactly that. They say, okay, well, the only thing we've agreed upon is to meet again. So that is an action item. You come out saying, all right, we'll come back to the table again. And that's it. But at least it is a very mild solution, but at least it resolves it temporarily.
and give people time to think, to see what they're willing to give up, or after you have cooled down from the heated discussion, you may better see the points that each other have and may come back to an agreement. That's the hope.
When can you say no to your chair? And when can you not say no to your chair?
My prior chair, the chair that hired me, was a lovely, lovely man. We're talking the last century, okay? So it's now the early 90s, and I've gone to one of these junior faculty seminars, and one of the topics that they did was, time control, being in control of your time, and you're going to be asked to do way too many things. You have to learn to politely but clearly say no and not get overextended. So in my seminar, I come back, I'm all pumped up, and the chair puts me on this incredibly time-consuming school-wide committee, and it's the early 90s, and they had a woman on every committee, so I think I was there for my chromosomes, because I was the only junior faculty there. I had no idea what they were talking about. It was so above my head. I was like, the whole time, and it was going to be every week, and I went to my chair. I practiced what I was going to say. I practiced out loud, and I said, thank you so much for nominating me to serve on this important committee. I realized I could learn a lot, but at this point, I feel that my time would be better served elsewhere, so I would like to respectfully decline. And he smiled at me and goes, that was very good, but you can't say no to me. you go practice that on someone else. So, sometimes you can walk in as practiced and polished and thoughtful as you want, and there you go.
So one of the, that's great, I love that. One of the important things is to figure out what's really important to the chair. If this is something that is near and dear to the chair's heart, something that's really critically important, but you realize it's going to be challenging for you to do it, you shouldn't say no. But what you should do is turn that into the win-win. Saying, I know that this is really important for the department, and so I will serve on this committee, but I'm a junior faculty member, and my promotion depends on my being productive, and this is a lot of time. So I'm happy to serve, but we need to talk about the other obligations that I have to the department and figure out how we can carve out additional time from my departmental responsibilities so that I can have that time to do my scholarly activities
Yeah, I
or
didn't do
something
that.
like that.
Yeah, that would have been good.
This is 20 or 30 years later, right? But I wouldn't have thought about that in the 90s either. I would have just done what they told me. So you have to figure out what's important. Do what's really important for them. Because that's actually, put something in your back pocket. You can use it now or you can save it for later. If it's not that critical for them, or if you can promote another faculty member to do something that will help their career, that's also turning it into that win-win. You've been asked to do something, you realize it's just not going to work. You have an idea of who else can do it just as well, or even maybe better than you can. You can talk to the chair and say, love to do this, I've got this grant, my funding is low, I'm in a big stressful situation. I think so-and-so would be perfect, and it would really be in keeping with their career goals.
That reminds me of, the role of an editor in the peer review. If you decline as a reviewer, you can't say, hell no, it's not worth the time. That doesn't go over well, right? They always ask, is there somebody else that you would, suggest that would be appropriate to review? It reflects what's important to that individual, that there is import to whatever that task is, and then you're not just blowing up.
That goes along with the idea of coming in with a solution, right, that you offer the chair, an option that helps him or her with the fundamental problem, but get yourself off the hook a little bit.
Do you guys have questions?
Yeah,
I have
sure.
some questions too, but there must be.
Or scenarios.
Yeah, you can, just give us a hypothetical that happened to you this morning. We have a few more slides and we'll finish up with those while you're thinking about some of the hypotheticals. I think we've covered some of these, but I thought we'd put down what some of the pitfalls are. Going over someone's head, I said an end run only works sometimes in football. I think this is a way to create a real problem for yourself, don't you think? You have to decide who your boss is, who your chair is, and I think trying to go around potentially or over can be a problem. Comments on this?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I've seen this in one of my junior faculty who goes straight to the chair. When in our department, it's really, you got to go through the division chief. And once you're branded as an insurgent, that's it forever. So you have to be careful.
I think that's probably a very common scenario across the country. Is that there are different rules in different departments and different institutions. And in some places that does happen. There's certain individuals that, for whatever reason, they do have direct access to the chair. Perhaps because they've gone this route before and it's worked, or for any other reason. But in terms of angering people, it is, as a program head, a division head, does feel put off if all of a sudden you bypass them. So, there is some nuance and some finesse to, the hierarchy that takes place, and you always want to be seen as communicating, not sort of, going through a silent route.
If there's a reason to go to the chair and not through whoever you report to, as long as the issue isn't that person. So you may have an interpersonal conflict with the person you report to. This would not work for that.
Right.
But if there's some compelling reason, or you met the chair in the hallway and you did have that meeting that we told you not to have, then you communicate to that person you report to, just letting you know, I bumped into so-and-so and we had a discussion about this. I didn't want you to find out later that I had talked to them, because I know this is an important issue for you as well. So you can cover your tracks a little bit if that happens.
Yeah.
But I agree, and I agree so much because I did that once too. Not pretty, not pretty.
And probably this goes back to the email topic. Probably one of the biggest pitfalls of email is exactly that. Is that people sometimes don't look at what's below, and email groupings. Other people are put on, then other people are selectively taken off. And
Watch out for
you always want to read the whole thing, and you don't want to send too many emails.
Start fresh.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah,
CC
those email
everybody.
chains are terrible, terrible, terrible.
Yeah, you start over, I think, you just, if you want to write something sensitive and say in reference to the 58 emails you just received, so that it can't be sent back, because nobody can be sent back at all. reply to all, I think you should have to pay money to. It should be put somewhere else. I might even move it so that you absolutely can't do it. If I haven't learned how to do that yet, maybe a computer maybe can tell me how. We've talked about some of the others, timing, we talked about lack of preparation. I think coming in angry goes to the email issue also. This is unacceptable and I need to see you right away. I think it's the same idea. A period of cooling off, just as you wouldn't see, taught never to send an angry letter, but to leave it on, let it cool off overnight and read it in the morning. That's why email is so dangerous. And I think coming into a meeting angry, it just doesn't really, probably doesn't really suit one's purposes very often. Is there ever a time you're allowed to come in angry, Dr. Bush?
That's-
Righteous indignation. Righteously indignant.
Yeah.
And then I put unbecoming excuses or petulant. I hear this. Well, he did it. He got away with it. That's really not an argument that a professional can make, even though we want to. So I guess we just have to maybe phrase that differently. It's the idea of fairness, I guess. I think we all are looking for fairness in life. Maybe life isn't fair, but we're looking for fairness, and we have the right to expect it. To some extent, but I think maybe it's a matter of phrasing it, how you voice the thing that's been done, how you characterize the thing that's been done to you that's unfair. The last line is directly from Dr. Bush. Remember
Yes,
that having your chair as an adversary is one of the best ways to derail a career.
Yes, it is it's something that I put much thought about, because when you think on the structure of the university, you see how much your relationship with the chair will influence your progression within that university. So in the same way that the chair can facilitate things for you, the chair can also make things difficult for you if the person that is in a position of authority is antagonized by you. And so you may think you're right and may have reason to complain or see some problems, but it's better to bring the chair into the conversation rather than constantly have an adversarial position to the chair, because that doesn't help at all. And that person may have a different perspective of what you're seeing. And so trying to reach out and have a dialogue may cool off things, and then you'll be able to progress rather than be in this constant friction.
I think a positive quality is to be true, to be genuine, in terms of your concerns. So there's a lot that goes with vibes, and you interact with a lot of people on the campus in a lot of different spheres. This comes up all the time, and you can't go into a meeting with your chair and then you pass them in the hall and you act very differently, or in a different sphere, you come across very differently, because the message that they would receive is that this person's not really serious about that. That's not really where they're coming from. So, I think it's important to understand that not just where they are coming from and how they perceive the problem that you bring or the issue that you bring to them, but that it's a real issue for you, and that you're genuine about that.
And I would say, echoing what Dennis was saying, that same attitude has to go with your section chief and your division chief and the chair of the course that you're teaching in. And you have to realize that this is a very interwoven, intermeshed organization. And I think a lot of us went into science or medicine because we're either science geeks and want to think about a problem at the bench, or we do medicine and it's often a one-on-one interaction with a patient, and there's a clear power base and the physician is in power. And what we're asking you to do now is totally different than what you were trained to do. This is putting yourself somewhere in a large vertical and horizontal hierarchy. It's interacting with lots of different people, and you're never going to make everybody happy, but you're going to have to decide who you're going to make happier and who might be a little less happy. So this is really, really different than any training for science or medicine, and it's a skill set that maybe some of us would have gone into business if we liked this kind of thing. But this is what people do in business. So much of it is interacting well in a large organization, and yet we're not trained to do that. But to be successful, it's really critical to just now acquire that skill.
And I would just add that even though it may seem like it's a large academic organization, it's really small in many ways. And so word gets out. I tell you, it's amazing. And so if you're unhappy, even though it might be in a totally different domain that you're sort of venting, you got to be careful, because that will eventually circle back.
Especially negatives.
Yes, especially.
Negatives, spread like wildfire.
And one of the things that I thought was very helpful in one of the courses that I attended is the knowledge of the different kinds of personality and how people behave, and how one type of personality perceives another. And so you have to be aware that maybe you're more introverted and the other one's more extroverted. One is more of a thinker, the other one's a person of action. And something that may be seen natural to you, to the other person is, oh. And so recognizing what are the different kinds of personalities and behaviors will help you navigate the system of the department you're working in.
We mentioned early on about the idea of follow-up. I think Dr. Gordon suggested the idea of following up with an email or something that summarizes the meeting. Sometimes a meeting with the chair will generate a letter as a result, a letter of understanding or something in relation. So perhaps would it be important just to understand what the next step is? Is the chair coming to you with something? When is it important, though, to send a note and follow up on your part? Should there always be some communication that goes back and forth? Either coming from the chair to you or from you to the chair?
Personally, I think if the discussion is something of substance and a decision was made, you're not just talking about, oh, you saw this movie or this whatever, but if it's of substance and a decision was made, it's really important to achieve clarity that you understand what the decision was and that they agree that that was the decision that was made. We've all heard about, games of telephone and whatnot. Somebody says something, I hear it. Did I hear what they said? Maybe, maybe not. Did I understand the implications of what they said? Maybe, maybe not. So if a decision was made on a matter of substance, I think it's really important to follow it up and just say, thank you. We had a great, productive meeting. I was really happy. I just want to clarify. This is what I heard, and I believe that this is what we're doing. Thanks again. It doesn't have to be long.
Right.
It has to be like a paragraph. And then wait to hear back, and you'll hear back probably pretty quickly. Yes, this was great, or, that's not really what I meant. And if it wasn't what I meant, but it was what you heard, then you may have to go back for a second round if what they're saying is not acceptable to you.
Any of us would be available to you anytime, particularly Dr. Gordon and I. But are there questions or comments from the audience?
Oh, it wasn't on.
There's such an erudite panel.
They're just overwhelmed. Oh my, all these interpersonal interactions.
It's easy for us to say, right? Some of these things we've said, please.
I might have missed this from the beginning, but what about speaking to your chair like in a social setting, at a party or a gathering, or is there any?
About a matter of substance? You mean sort of
Yeah.
grab, I think one of the things we talked about in timing, we thought timing was important in terms of scheduling a meeting for something of substance. But what about that? Can you grab someone on the fly in a social setting and say, by the way, about my salary?
I think if
While
you
they're drinking?
Right. I think when you grab them, you can only say, I'd really like to meet with you about this, and leave it at that. If you start getting into it, it's not the right context, and that'll just be very off-putting.
But it gives them the topic, and that's
Yeah.
fine to do.
And they'll say, great, why don't you contact me, we'll set up a time.
Right.
Otherwise, talk about social things.
Yes, exactly. Which are actually very important.
They are very important, more important than we think.
Yes.
Networking and social interactions, which is why we have the mixers.
That's right. So
And on
restaurants.
that note,
Right.
we invite everyone to join us in the faculty lounge now for some refreshments. And I really, really appreciate the panel's participation in helping to put the material together and being here this afternoon. Thank you.
For 1 minute, people had.
Yeah.
If you'd like a private consultation, come
Actually, yeah, come downstairs to the
or
mixer.
downstairs, yes.
We can always have private conversations there. And even if you're rushing out the door, stop in.